The note that never left him. People always say Keanu Reeves is one of the kindest men in Hollywood, but very few know how far his kindness truly goes, or how deeply he holds on to the things that matter. Not the fame, not the money, but the moments, the words, and the people who leave marks on his soul. It all began on a movie set decades ago. Back then, he and Sandra Bullock were young, rising stars trying to survive long hours and high expectations. The film was demanding endless takes, explosions, action scenes, fake smiles for the cameras. Yet, behind the scenes, there was something quiet, something genuine that grew between them. Not romance exactly, but something pure, a connection built on respect and unspoken understanding. One day, after a long shoot, Sandra noticed Keanu sitting alone, away from the noise. He looked thoughtful, lost in a world of his own. Without thinking, she walked over, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You always look like you need this more than anyone," she said, smiling. He looked up, surprised, then smiled back. "Thanks, I guess I do." They sat there for a while, not talking much, just sharing silence. When she left, she wrote him a small note on a folded napkin. "Thank you for being kind when the world isn't." She slipped it under his script before she went home, not expecting him to ever mention it, but he did. Years later, because Keanu Reeves kept that note. He kept it folded carefully, inside a small box filled with handwritten messages, movie set memories, and letters from people he'd met through life. Every note, every word, he kept them all. He once said in a quiet interview, "People forget what they say, but sometimes what they write stays like a heartbeat." That napkin, stained slightly with coffee, became something more than paper. To him, it was proof that small kindnesses mattered. What no one knew then was that the note would come back into his life when he needed it most. Years later, when everything he loved seemed to fall apart. After tragedy, after loss, after silence, he opened that box again. And that napkin, that simple message from decades ago, would remind him of who he was, the man who chose kindness even when life wasn't kind to him. And for Sandra, it would become the symbol of a friendship that never faded, even when time and distance separated them. But before that, something unexpected would happen, something that would turn that quiet friendship into a story the world would never forget. Because one day, when the world thought Keanu had moved on, he opened his heart again, and the note that started it all became the bridge between the man he was and the man he became. The box of forgotten things. Years passed after that movie, but the note stayed with him. Keanu kept it in a small wooden box that looked ordinary from the outside, but inside, it carried the story of his life. Little things most people would throw away: movie tickets, small letters, folded pieces of paper. He kept them all. To him, they were reminders of people who had been kind, moments that still mattered. He called it the box of forgotten things, though he never really forgot any of them. It wasn't about holding onto the past, it was about remembering that kindness was real, even when the world tried to convince him otherwise. One night, after a long day of filming, he sat alone in his apartment. The city lights flickered outside. He poured himself a cup of tea and opened the box again. His fingers brushed over a few old notes, one from a fan who said his movie helped them survive a hard year, another from a crew member who thanked him for helping carry heavy equipment in the rain. And then, under everything else, he saw the napkin from Sandra. He unfolded it carefully. The ink was faded now, but he could still read her handwriting. "Thank you for being kind when the world isn't." For a long moment, he just stared at it. It wasn't love or nostalgia, he felt it was peace. That simple line had once been a whisper in a noisy world, and somehow it still felt alive. Later that night, as he walked through the city in a hoodie and worn shoes, no one noticed him. He preferred it that way. He stopped at a small bookstore he often visited. The old owner smiled when he saw him. "Still collecting words?" The man joked. Keanu smiled softly. "Always." He bought an old journal that night, a blank one. When he got home, he wrote something on the first page. Kindness doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be remembered. He didn't know it yet, but that line would one day appear in interviews, in speeches, and even on walls painted by strangers who felt connected to his quiet way of living. Meanwhile, Sandra was on a different path. Her career was rising fast, but her life was getting harder. She faced heartbreak, loss, and loneliness behind all the laughter people saw on screen. One evening, while going through an old photo album, she found a picture from that same film set. Keanu was laughing in it, holding a coffee cup. On the back of the photo, she had written the date and nothing else. For some reason, she couldn't stop staring at it. Something in her heart told her to reach out, but before she could, the news came. Keanu had taken time off from everything. No films, no interviews, no appearances. And that small note she once wrote, the one she thought he'd forgotten, would soon become the key to finding him again when the world thought he had disappeared for good. The search for Silent Sight had been months since anyone had seen Keanu in public. Studios couldn't reach him, journalists stopped asking, and fans online started to worry. Rumors spread. Some said he was traveling, others said he was healing. Sandra didn't believe any of it. She knew him better than most. Keanu didn't disappear to escape fame, he disappeared when he needed to breathe again. One afternoon, while sorting through old scripts, Sandra found the original envelope from the film where they'd met. Inside, along with her notes, was a small folded napkin identical to the one she'd written all those years ago. Her hands trembled. She couldn't explain why, but she felt he needed her. She reached out to one of his close friends, a quiet man named Paul who'd known Keanu since the early days. When she called, Paul hesitated before saying, "He's okay, Sandra. Just somewhere quiet. The same cabin he always goes to when the noise gets too loud." "The mountains?" she asked. Paul sighed. "Yeah." He said he's trying to remember what peace sounds like. That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the people who relied on Keanu's quiet strength, the way he lifted others. When he was breaking inside, she decided she needed to see him, not as a co-star, but as a friend who owed him the same kindness he'd once given her. She drove through winding mountain roads the next morning, the world turning colder with every mile. The cabin sat near a frozen lake, surrounded by tall pine trees that looked untouched by time. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the window, she saw him sitting by the fire, writing in a notebook. She hesitated before knocking. When he opened the door, his eyes widened slightly in surprise, then softened. "You found me. Someone had to," she said quietly, holding up a thermos. "And I brought coffee." He smiled, the same calm, gentle smile she remembered. Still remembering the small things, huh? Inside, the cabin was simple: books stacked in corners, candles burning low, and on the table, a small wooden box. She recognized it immediately. "You still have it?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I always will." They talked for hours that day. About life, about grief, about the strange kind of peace that comes with solitude. At one point, she asked, "Why do you keep every note, Keanu? Even the small ones?" He looked at her with quiet eyes. "Because words outlive people. Sometimes, when I forget who I am, I read them again. They remind me that being kind still matters." She didn't say anything, just reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You don't always have to be the one who carries everyone else." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but if I stop, who will?" That night, when she left the cabin, she noticed something new on the wall near the door, her napkin note, framed in glass. She stood there for a moment, tears in her eyes, realizing something powerful. He didn't keep the note to remember her. He kept it to remember himself. But neither of them knew that the world was about to rediscover him again, through a single act of kindness that would make headlines everywhere. The story that broke the silence. A few weeks after that visit, Sandra returned to Los Angeles. But her heart stayed in that cabin. Something about seeing Keanu again had reminded her of the person she used to be before fame, before fear. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed in the mountains, living quietly, walking by the lake each morning, writing in his journal each night. He didn't plan to come back to the world anytime soon, but the world found him anyway. One snowy morning, he stopped at a small-town diner near the base of the mountain. He was wearing a worn jacket, his hair messy, no one recognizing him except the waitress, a young single mother named Emma. She froze when she realized who he was. "You're..." He smiled softly. "Just someone who wants coffee." Over the next few days, he returned every morning, They spoke a little each time. He learned that she was working 2 jobs to raise her son, who was ill. She learned that he liked his coffee black and his silence long. One morning, he noticed her sitting at the counter, crying quietly. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Sometimes life doesn't need fixing. Sometimes it just needs patience." Before leaving, he left an envelope on the counter. Inside was a check enough to pay off her debts, cover her son's treatment, and help her start over. But when she opened it, there was no name. Just a small note: "You are seen. Keep going." The story would have stayed hidden if the diner owner hadn't told it weeks later. The local newspaper wrote a short article about the kind stranger who changed a mother's life. Someone recognized the handwriting on the note, and overnight, the world knew. Social media exploded, people posting messages about the mysterious kindness of Keanu Reeves. Articles appeared everywhere, calling him the quiet light in a noisy world. But Keanu never spoke about it when reporters asked. He simply said, "Sometimes helping one person is enough." Sandra read the story at home. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "He's still the same." That night, she sent him a message that simply said, "I saw what you did. You always remember everyone else's notes." He replied hours later, "Because one note once reminded me who I was." That was the truth. Her small napkin, written decades earlier, had started it all. The habit of keeping notes, of holding on to words, of believing that kindness, no matter how small, could change the course of someone's life. A few weeks later, she visited him again at the cabin. When she arrived, she found something new pinned above the fireplace. It was the same note Emma had written to thank him. "You are seen. Keep going." Sandra smiled through tears. "You keep every note," she whispered. He nodded quietly. Because every note is a moment when someone tried to be good, and those moments are worth saving. But neither of them knew that one final note, one that hadn't been written yet, would bring the story full circle in a way no one expected. Asterisk the note he never got to Redmond's past. And the story of Keanu's quiet generosity spread everywhere. Fans wrote letters. Children sent drawings. People from across the world shared how his kindness had inspired them. His manager's office began receiving hundreds of envelopes every week. Keanu didn't read them all, but he kept every single one. "Someday," he said softly, "when I have time, I'll open them one by one." He went back to filming soon after, slowly re-entering the world that had once exhausted him. But this time, he carried something different, a calm light, a peace that others could feel. People on set noticed how he still greeted every crew member, how he stayed after long hours to help the sound team, how he never once complained. It wasn't an act, it was who he was. Sandra watched from afar, proud. They spoke less now, both busy, both moving in their own directions. But their connection never faded. She still had his messages saved, still smiled whenever she saw an interview where he said something quietly profound. She knew that someday their paths would cross again, and they almost did. One rainy night, in New York, Sandra was scheduled to attend a film premiere. As her car arrived at the theater, she noticed a man in a dark coat walking under an umbrella. Alone, head down, she knew that walk. Her heart jumped. "Stop the car," she said quickly. She opened the door, stepped into the rain, but by the time she reached the sidewalk, he was gone. She smiled faintly, always disappearing when the world's too loud, she whispered. Later that week, she decided to write him another note. Not a text, not an email, a real letter, just like before. It said, "Thank you for teaching me that silence can be kind. If the world ever gets too heavy again, remember your light doesn't go unnoticed." She sent it to his address, sealed with a pressed wildflower she had kept from the cabin. But 2 weeks later, the letter came back, returned to sender. Her heart sank for a moment, until she noticed something strange on the envelope. Written in his handwriting was a short message. "I already got the message, just not on paper." She smiled through tears. Somehow, she knew what he meant. He was still keeping every note, even the ones never written. Every smile, every small kindness, every silent thank you from strangers. To him, those were all notes to just invisible ones the world left behind. That same night, he sat alone in his apartment, looking through his wooden box again. Inside were letters from friends, thank yous from strangers, and yes, the napkin she'd written all those years ago. He placed the returned envelope on top, smiled softly, and whispered, "Some messages don't need to travel far." But what neither of them knew was that one more note, an unexpected one, was still waiting for them. Both, it wouldn't come from her or from him, but from someone whose life they had quietly changed forever. Asterisk the last note in the box had happened a few months later. Keanu was back in Los Angeles, finishing a small independent film when his assistant handed him a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. He opened it slowly, curious, not knowing it would be the one note that would stay with him forever. "Dear Mr. Reeves, you don't know me, but you changed my mother's life. She used to work at a diner near the mountains. You left her a note once that said you are seen. Keep going." She kept that note by her bedside until she passed away last month. "She told me to find you one day and say thank you. She said your kindness reminded her that good still exists, even when life is cruel. I just wanted you to know." She kept going. "And so will I. Sincerely, Ethan." Keanu sat still for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. He read the letter again and again until the words blurred through his tears. He didn't know what to say, what to feel. He just whispered softly. She kept going. Later that night, he took out his wooden box, the one where he had kept every note, every thank you, every memory. He carefully placed Ethan's letter on top, right above Sandra's napkin. For a long moment, he stared at it, then whispered, "Maybe that's the point. Every act of kindness leaves a note somewhere." Meanwhile, Sandra was in another city, preparing for a talk show appearance. Before the interview began, the host asked her about Keanu again. She smiled and said softly, "He keeps every note, every word, every kindness, and that's why the world keeps him." Her eyes glistened as she added, "He doesn't talk about it, but he carries people's stories like they're part of his own." After the show, she got a text from him. Just one line, "Another note found me today," she replied. "Then keep it safe. It belongs in the box." He wrote back, "It already is." Days later, he returned to the cabin. The air was cool, quiet, peaceful. He walked to the small lake, the same place where he had once sat with Sandra years ago. In his hands, he held a single sheet of paper, the letter from Ethan. He didn't say much, just folded it gently and placed it inside a small glass jar. Then he set it on the windowsill of the cabin. "You are seen," he whispered, "and you kept going." As he looked around the cabin, every note, every message seemed alive. The laughter, the tears, the gratitude of hundreds of lives touched by small, silent gestures. He realized then that the box wasn't really full of paper. It was full of lives. People who were seen, people who were helped, people who remembered kindness and passed it on. When he finally left the cabin, the morning sun caught the jar by the window, making it glow like gold. And that's how the legend of the man who kept every note and every soul behind them quietly became something eternal.